Hello, everybody. Welcome to section 1.5, part 1. This is on solving equations. So most of you should be familiar with solving equations in general. For example, like a simple one might be, we have solve for x. If we want to solve something like 3x minus 2 equals 4, right? What you do is you take a simple equation like this, and we would like add 2 to both sides, and then we get 3x equals 6, and then we divide by 3 on both sides, and we get x equals 6 over 3, which is just 2, right? So when we're solving for equations, they can be really simple like this, or they could be more complicated, and that's what we're going to be going over, right? So the first kind of type that we're going to be worrying about is quadratic equations. We've actually been working towards this skill for a while now, right? So we can solve quadratic equations with the factoring methods that we've been practicing. So for example, if we wanted to solve for x squared plus x minus 3 equals 2. Or sorry, not 2. Let's actually do 3. So there's kind of a simple algorithm you can follow. So first, make it equal to 0. So in this case, we have it equal to 3. We need to subtract 3 from both sides. So we'll get x squared plus x minus 6 equals 0. All right, that's an important first step, no matter what factoring method you're using. The second step here is to actually go ahead and then factor. So in this case, you can see that this quadratic here factors into x minus 2, x plus 3 pretty easily using the AC method. So see lecture 1.4 if you wanted to review that kind of factoring. Okay, so once you have factored third, what do? We use what's called the zero product property. The zero product property says that if we have something like this, so we have x plus 3, x minus 2. If we have two things that are multiplying each other and they equal 0, so in this case, we have this thing here and this thing here, and they're multiplying to equal 0, right? Then that means that we have x plus 3 equals 0 or x minus 2 equals 0, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of explore each case. So if x plus 3 equals 0, then that means that if we subtract 3 from both sides, x equals negative 3. And then if we have x minus 2 equals 0, we can add 2 to both sides, right? So we get plus 2 on both sides, and we get x equals 2, right? Get rid of that. Don't need that. Right? Cool. So then these are two answers. So when we're solving for quadratics, oftentimes you will find that it can have more than one solution to the quadratic, right? But factoring is not the only way we can solve quadratics. So there's another way we can solve quadratics using the quadratic formula, right? And most of you will probably be pretty familiar with this. So if we have a quadratic, like ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Now remember, this equals 0. That's important. Then we know that x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, where a, b, and c are all these things up here, coefficients. Okay, and so when you solve the quadratic formula like this, there are like 3 possibilities for the solutions you get. So you can have, you can have 2 real solutions, which is what we have like in this case right here, 2 real solutions. We can have 1 real solution, and sometimes we can have 2, or not imaginary, a better word would be 2 complex solutions. Okay, so you just got to bear that in mind. So for example, if, let's say we wanted to solve for x. For this quadratic, let's do x squared plus x plus 3 equals negative 3. So this time, remember, we need to make it equal to 0, so we're going to do x squared plus x. And then we're going to add 3 to both sides. We'll get plus 6 equals 0. So here we have a is equal to 1, b is equal to 1, and c is equal to 6. So if we use our quadratic formula, we get x equals negative b is negative 1, plus or minus square root b squared is 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times 6, a times c, all over 2 times a, 2 times 1. And if we simplify this down a little bit, we get negative 1 plus or minus the square root. We get 1 minus 24, and then all over 2. And then we can do negative 1 plus or minus, and this becomes negative 23, all over 2. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out the negative 1 from here. So to be clear, this becomes negative 1 times 23. And then I'm going to split the radical. So this becomes negative 1 times the square root of 23 all over 2. And then we've got negative 1 plus or minus, this is I square root 23 over 2. And I don't see an easy way to simplify this any further, so this would be a complete answer. Now, if, for example, this were something easy to calculate, like the square root of 25, you should definitely simplify that. But for this problem, this is good enough. Okay. Along the same lines as quadratics, there's some equations that will look really, really scary, but are just kind of like quadratic types. So some scary equations are what we call quadratic. I can't spell today. Type. So what do I mean by quadratic type? Well, an easy example would be if we have like x to the 4th minus 3x squared plus 2 equals 0. Now, the key thing to note here is that we can write this as like x squared squared minus 3 squared plus 2, right? So all the powers of x here are even. So then if we wanted to, we can think of x squared as like another variable. Let's call it y. So you can see that this becomes y squared minus 3y plus 2 equals 0. And that's just a simple quadratic. So then what you do is you solve for y, right? And let's say you solve for y and you get like, oh, y is equal to, I don't know, like 3. Well, then you go back and you do 3 is equal to y, right, is equal to x squared from this up here. And then you do x is equal to square root 3. Okay, cool. Another kind of like scary quadratic type thing that actually doesn't turn out to be too bad is if we have like like x to the 1/4 power plus 5x to the 1/8 power minus 8, for example. And you're like, oh God, that looks terrible. Well, we can write it like this. We could do x to the 1/8 to the 2, because if we multiply 2 times 1/8, we get 1/4 back, plus 5x to the 1/8 minus 8 equals 0. So here what you'll do is you'll think of y as equal to x to the 1/8, and then solve for y. So some equations look kind of scary, but if they are quadratic type, they're actually just not scary at all once you pierce their secrets. Okay, cool. So the last thing I'm going to talk about for today is absolute value equations. So shifting gears a little bit. So these are best demonstrated with an example. So for example, let's say we want to solve for x. Why don't we do like 3x minus 2, and then like maybe minus 1 equals 2. How do we solve for x? Well, first, get the absolute value alone on one side. So this means we're going to have to add 1 to both sides of this. So we're going to do 3x minus 2 equals 3. So added 1 to both sides. And then from here, we're going to split it into cases, because absolute value is ultimately just being, it's just a cases function, right? So case 1 is we have 3x minus 2 equals 3. So I think of this like the positive case. You'll see why in a minute. So if we solve this, we get 3x equals 5, and then x equals 5/3. And then case 2, which I like to call like the negative case, is when you do it like this. So you drop a negative in front of the whole thing that was in the absolute values. And you get something like this. And so then we can solve this. I'm going to distribute this negative into the parentheses. So we get negative 3x plus 2 equals 3. Subtract 2 from both sides, we get negative 3x equals 1, and then x equals negative 1/3. So these are both solutions to the absolute value equation. Cool. All right, we will talk more about solving equations in the next video. Until then, keep working on your homework.